When the Real World Hit a Spoiled Rich Kid, Viewers Edition. Other folks told us about their rich kid stories, but we knew you had some better ones. So we sifted through your comments and found some of our favorites to read today. Story 1. For the first half year of grad school, I shared a uni hall flat with a girl from a very rich family in a rather poor country. She told me early on that she wasn't used to housework, having never had to lift a finger growing up. She seemed apologetic about it, so I offered to help her with everything she struggled with. Unfortunately, that was clearly a front. She also really just didn't want to clean and only ever did so if we had a flat inspection coming up. She suggested shared dishes, cutlery, etc. I refused after only a few weeks. To top it off, she would repeatedly tell me that I didn't have to clean so well for flat inspections, or that we didn't have one coming up, so I didn't need to clean at all. Eventually, a flat inspection went so badly for her, her room was an absolute mess, and she'd expected me to do her dirty dishes as I was cleaning the kitchen the night before, but I didn't, and she asked me if I'd clean her room for her. I offered one last time to help her and show her how to do it. She refused and offered me money to do it for her. I closed the door in her face and haven't spoken to her since. I later learned that in the year she'd been there longer than me, she'd had 2 flatmates, both of whom moved out of the halls just to get away from her. I did the same, though I'd planned to do so earlier as there were a bunch of annoyances in the halls. Another half year later, I heard on the grapevine that she'd had to move out of the halls as she failed inspection after inspection when they didn't give her a new flatmate who'd do most of the cleaning for her. Apparently, her parents tried to intervene, but that obviously didn't work. Unfortunately, I doubt the lesson stuck. There's a decent chance her parents just paid her a nice apartment and a housekeeper. That's unfortunate, because it sounds like there may have been some actual desire to improve on her part, but just not the drive to take action. I swear, we see so many of these stories about rich kids who never had to work, not growing out of that habit as they became adults. Rich parents, I know you've got money and you want to give your kids the life you never had or whatever, but more often than not, it seems to be a recipe for just screwing up a kid's life. Story 2. I've also met rich kids that I kind of felt bad for. They grow up, try to distance themselves a little bit from their parents and be independent, only to realize that their parents absolutely failed them and taught them nothing at all and that they need to know to get by in the real world. I know a couple of girls like that in my dorm hall. One of my best friends here genuinely didn't realize that some university scholarships cover boarding as well as tuition, because I wouldn't have had housing here otherwise and wouldn't have been able to afford it. Her first couple of weeks here were rough because she didn't know how to do laundry. She didn't know how to make basic dorm food. She literally set off the fire alarm for our entire floor with a chicken cup of noodles. And she ended up in tears the first week because she didn't know that you had to pick up the bigger things before vacuuming or the vacuum would get clogged. She came running to my room crying because she vacuumed up a quarter and thought the noise that the vacuum was making meant it was about to blow up. She's genuinely a nice, sympathetic, compassionate, giving person. She was just failed by her parents who taught her absolutely nothing she needed to know. So when she stepped into the real world, she just felt like she was failing repeatedly. Story 3. I'm not exactly rich, just lucky enough to be born to parents who cared a lot about my education. For reference, I have disabilities, including learning disabilities, so that made my parents, especially my father, spend more money on additional education services. I had private tutors alongside my teachers who tutored me every day after school. I went to tutoring centers in summer school. During that time, my parents were putting away money in a college savings account so I could go to college and graduate without debt. I grew up thinking everyone around me had the same thing, access to private tutors, learning centers, etc. I was wrong. My friends can't afford college, and when I found out, I told them, "Don't you have a college savings account?" That's when they told me not everyone has one, only the lucky few who are born to parents who care a lot about their children's education. One day, I promised to pay my parents back as a way of saying thank you for not giving up on me. I'm extremely privileged and fortunate enough to be their daughter. I can't thank them enough for the life they have given me, the sacrifices they made so I could have a fair chance as my non-disabled peers. Thanks, Mom and Dad. Honestly, even if you aren't exactly rich as you say it, it still sounds like your parents did a great job raising you, and you did a great job learning from others, having empathy for what they've gone through. That's awesome to hear, and frankly, it's a lesson a lot of people from any background could stand to learn. Story 4. In middle school, food technology opened up to us as a subject. I sat next to these obviously rude rich kids. One day they complained that there was a bug in their batter. Teacher found no bugs, but they refused to continue working, so she told them to clean up and wait for the bell to go. As they stacked their batter-filled dish in the sink, one spilled it all over the floor. The other leaves to go play video games in our empty homeroom, while the other stands around refusing to clean up. At some point, he asks me to show him how to wash the dishes. I do, but he just can't get it. That's when my friend shows up and starts cleaning them all for him. I feel ashamed I'm not helping, and we do the rest of the dishes while he sits on the bench and kicks his legs for the rest of the lesson. By the end of the lesson, the teacher comes over, it's a big classroom, and asks what's on the floor. He again refuses to clean up the batter, so my friend cleans it up while I dry and put away dishes. My friend got an achievement, part of a reward system in our school, for helping out. The only reason I go to a school with so many rich kids is because my dad works there, so I get the added bonus of the teacher saying how good I was in that class. It was a pain, though, and when we got the chance to submit our friends and people we didn't want to be with next year, they were on my list. They bullied me and my friends all year, so it wasn't surprising. Story 5. My cousin was so spoiled all throughout our childhood. He got whatever he wanted, did whatever he wanted, absolutely no consequences. He did the, "But Mom, I want it. If you love me, you'll get it for me." He used that on my mom, too. Once he got a job, he thought he was the hot crap, making his own money, being his own person, just on top of the world. We were going to get food and had this rich snob smirk and went, "Haha, I got this, everyone, no worries. Kyle is here to save the day." He checked his bank account over the speaker, thinking he was going to brag about how much money he had. He only worked less than a week at that time being. And the bank said, "You have $0.10. He blew all of his money in one day on a damn cowboy hat. Oh, God. The cowboy hat was the cherry on top that I didn't even know I wanted. Not to crap on the kid, at least he got a job and started working, and I hope that cowboy hat taught him a valuable lesson. I mean, it better be valuable, considering what he paid for it. Story 6. I'm not from a wealthy family, but my dad makes very good money and spoils me quite a bit. However, I'm certain the only reason he does spoil me is that I never expect it and very rarely ask him directly to pay for anything. That I am careful with everything he buys for me, that I do my best to be a good and nice person to everyone I meet so there's no entitlement to worry about, and that I work really, really hard at school. Bar one semester where I slacked off and failed a couple classes. Never doing that again, let me tell you. And I never ever hesitate to help the people around me whenever I can, or to pay I do favors for people back when they help me. I got really lucky to have the dad I do, but I do my best to deserve that luck. I'm so determined to never ever be entitled like some of these kids. And I am also determined to be successful in my future career so I can give my kids everything they want, as long as they're decent and hardworking people, like my dad did for me. Story 7. I was in rehab with a 19-year-old spoiled guy who wanted to be a Fortnite streamer and failed to graduate high school because of it. He wasn't good or entertaining enough, didn't make a dime. One day I heard him yelling on the phone with his mom. As he stormed off, I asked what was going on. He said his parents want to make him go to the Step Down program another 3 months, and they had used up his trust fund to send him to that and other very expensive rehabs. He got kicked out of the rehab, and they sent him to one of the most restrictive, isolated rehab programs where he amazed. I don't know what happened to him after that. All I know is he's going nowhere unless he shapes up. Story 8. I had a friend in college who thought she was rich and spoiled. She'd brag to me all the time about how her mom paid for her credit card and got her a decent car and took her on shopping sprees. I believed her until our 3rd year when I was invited over to their place for dinner and found out that they had a nice small 1,200 square feet house in a very poor city in our state. I'd been through hell with poor parents, but that changed for me when my upper middle class grandparents took me in and I moved to a very nice suburb surrounded by mansions, so that's what I assumed she lived in. After I saw their modest way of living, I was furious at my friend for throwing away her parents' hard-earned money on clubbing and dining out all the time. She had no freaking clue just how hard the real world was. After college, she got a job as a school social worker, bragging to me how she was making a whopping $60K a year. Not too bad for a social worker straight out of grad school. I asked if she was supporting her parents at all, and she got indignant at me. I point out that I paid my grandparents rent since I was 16 and also covered their internet bill as they had rescued me from the foster system, and my friend informed me that her parents were rich. By that time, I knew her mom was a school teacher and her dad a modest bachelor's degree chemist. They were not wealthy, but they continued paying all their entitled brats' living expenses. We didn't talk for a few years after that, but last I heard, she was still living at home rent-free well into her 30s. Good Lord, that feels worse than a rich kid in some ways. I mean, I know the parents provide for her like that out of love, but clearly they've gone too far and spoiled their daughter. Like, how do you tell parents like that, hey, I know you love your daughter a ton, but holy crap, you've got to stop? I mean, it's their choice, and if they are happy doing it, then I guess that's up to them. Just doesn't sound like the healthiest situation. Story 9. The new employee was helping me with a washer and dryer delivery, and we had it done quickly. He said it was the hardest work he had ever done, and I told him he did well. I also knew it was his first job. He asked me to stop for 5 minutes at a house on the way back to the warehouse. Only 5 minutes. He said he wanted to say hello to a dog he knew. Okay, we stopped. I ate a snack as I waited for him. After 5 minutes, I went looking for him. He was on the porch, and a very old and crusty chocolate lab had its head in his lap. He was gently scratching his ears. Time to go? He asked. Yep, I'll see you later, he told the dog. He lifted his head, got up, and put a blanket back on it as we left. He told me in the truck that it was the dog of a friend that had died a few years back and that it was riddled with cancer. It died the next day, and my friend had not gotten back to it. The boss got hold of me a day or so later. Had we stopped on that day? Yup. Took care of a dog? Sort of. Do I watch Reddit videos? No. Watch this one. The People's security cam had caught it all, both of us in our company uniforms, and the phones were ringing off the hook. A news crew had come in. We had new customers. Sales were sloping up. The kid's first job and his first raise in less than a week. And he had just got the job because his dad felt he was too dependent on dad's money. But to me, maybe rich, but he knew what was important in life. Story 10. I love those rich kids think they're good at sports because they have fancy equipment or they've been scheduled against a bunch of scrubs types. I was a boxer in high school. Rich kid who'd obviously fought a lot of kids paid or intimidated into taking a dive or maybe just did so to curry favor with rich kids' parents gets into the ring with me. I was, still am, the type of person who doesn't care who you are or who your daddy is. I'm going to give you my best in any competition. Normally, amateur fights are the whole Olympic thing, headgear, point system, what have you. This kid wants to fight me as he'd fought everyone else. Pro rules because he thinks he's Mike Tyson. So I got scheduled for 8 rounds. Not a minute into the first round, I realized the gift I've been handed. This kid landed a couple pawing jabs with nothing on them, and I know he couldn't have knocked me out if I stuck my chin out at him. So I fight aggressively, keeping him on the ropes and doing just enough that the ref won't stop the fight so I can carry him. After 5 rounds of this, and taunting him in between rounds from across the ring Muhammad Ali style so he wouldn't quit in the stool and look like a bee, rich kids are all the same in that regard and I knew it, I decided to make sure it doesn't go the distance. Wouldn't want to get robbed on the cards after all. And as he's out cold and the referee could have counted to 500 without him getting up, I stand over him like Ali taunting Sonny Liston. Best night at the gym I ever had. F rich kids. I normally wouldn't advocate for punching rich kids to teach them a lesson, but in this one instance, yeah, this seems totally reasonable. I mean, even if all the kid learned was a little bit of humility, that would be good. Sadly, I doubt it really acted as much of a wake-up call for him. I mean, quite literally the opposite with how you knocked him out. Story 11. 10th grade, parent-teacher conferences required that the students be there as well. Mom and I were standing outside a classroom when an entitled rich girl and her mother came up, walking up the hall with the daughter talking loudly. This kid starts talking about us and how our clothes were drab and cheap. Dad was a repairman for the huge printers and paper cutters used by the newspapers and printing companies. Our necessities were covered, but no money for expensive anything. The mother looked up, then stared at her daughter with a look of absolute horror at what was coming out of her mouth in range of our hearing. Anyhow, the mother walks up to my mom and asks how much I get for an allowance. Mom told her, she turned around and her obnoxious daughter and said, "I hope you have been tucking away half of your allowance like I told you, because for the next 2 months, you are getting the same allowance as this young girl who has to help at home for her money." The first day of the next month, a very disgruntled rich girl hands me an envelope and snarls. It has $280 in it and an angrily written note saying, "I had to do this because you are poor." I very loudly told her to thank her mom for the money in the envelope. It will help buy some clothing I've been wanting, and walked away. Her comment got back to her mother, and I continued to get $200 per month until she stopped making derogatory comments in public. I know she got about $300 a month as an allowance. This was 1970, so that was a lot, because she was bragging about it in math class. I got a grand total of $5 a week. Honestly, good on her mom. It is good to remember that not all rich parents are bad parents. Sometimes you just don't realize the effect money like that has on you, and situations like this can act as a reminder. Also, $300 a month in 1970? Folks, I just checked a few inflation calculators online, and that's the equivalent of around $2,200 today. A month as an allowance. God. Story 12. After watching this and listening to these stories, I'm a bit ashamed of growing up a spoiled rich kid. My friend would always gawk at my house or fancy private schools or not go to expensive school trips, and I always wondered why. It's only $3,400, why can't you go? And they'd have to blatantly explain that they aren't as rich as me. My father has a high status in the Colorado, Texas, Alaska oil industry, and my mother has a job as an accountant. Together, they both rounded up a high sum of money each year. My brother and I grew up with maids cleaning our house every month, fancy trips monthly, and even fancier trips on school breaks, especially in summer, and I was always confused as to why other kids my age couldn't do the same things as me. Story 13. Here's one with a twist. I went to college with a kid that came over from South Africa whose dad was both rich and the leader of some small tribe that technically made him a king, or something. When he came over to study, he noticed people sitting in front of shops begging for money or sleeping rough. For some reason, this threw him for a loop, and he asked me what these people were doing there. He could not comprehend homeless people and had not actually seen any until he had come here. Something about the tribe took care of the downtrodden and all that. I explained, and he was like, "Ah, I see," and promptly hired a van, paid for drinks for the rest of the class if we helped him go round the local cash and carry to buy one of everything on the shelves and donate it to a local food kitchen and clothing bank. We stay in touch to this day, and the entire class are friends of the tribe, which, as I'm led to understand, means that if we're ever in serious trouble, then everyone grabs spears and daggers and comes to our aid. Aside from your last comment, which I'm just not getting into, this does give an interesting perspective. Like, he was clearly rich, but at the same time had a really different mindset about things. Definitely doesn't sound spoiled, but someone much more understanding of using his position and money to help others. Honestly, something a lot of other rich people could stand to learn. Story 14. My family has never been rich by any means, but the world hit just as hard. The summer of 8th grade, I worked a summer job and racked up quite a bit of money. I already had a bank account, so I stored it all in there. By 9th grade, I had nearly $1,000. The school I was in had vending machines that sold snacks and sodas. All were overpriced. At first, I didn't buy much, just a soda once in a while, but it kept progressing until I was buying 5 at least per day. I was also spending money on school lunch despite being sent. This was a private school with actually good lunches. Around this time, I installed Fallout Shelter and was spending loads of money on it. Yes, the mobile game. By the end of the year, I had under $10. None of the money spent on anything even remotely useful. The worst part about all this is $300 of the $1,000 was saved up money from birthdays. Some of the best lessons are the hardest learned. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.